The quiet love that found its way back. Before I tell you what happened, I need to explain how it all began, because you won't believe the ending if you don't understand the beginning. You see, I used to think love was something that happened like lightning. Fast, blinding, dramatic. But the truth is, sometimes it creeps in unnoticed, like sunlight spilling across a floor. Warm and slow, and without announcement. I met Lena on a Sunday. Not the kind of Sunday where the world is at peace and the birds chirp glitches into blue skies. It was one of those gray, indecisive Sundays in October, where the weather can't decide if it's still clinging to summer or letting go into autumn. I was early for my train and she was late for hers. That's how we ended up sitting on the same cold wooden bench at a forgotten platform, both pretending not to notice the other. I remember she wore a coat 2 sizes too big and shoes that had seen better years. I had earbuds in, music low, just enough to muffle the world without silencing it. She glanced at me once, quickly, like she was afraid I might catch her doing it. And even though I didn't turn my head, I noticed her eyes were the kind that looked like they knew things, not from reading books but from enduring life. It was a glance that lasted no more than a breath, and yet something about it settled inside me. For some reason I said, You missed the 12:45, and she smiled without moving her mouth. That was the first time I saw her really. Saw her in a way that would later haunt me when she was no longer around to be seen. We didn't talk more that day. Not a word. But we kept looking at each other in silence, like two strangers who had once met in another life and forgot how they used to speak. She boarded the train 15. I let mine pass by. I don't know why. I just sat there, staring at the track after she was gone, wondering if I'd ever see her again. I did. The next Sunday, same platform. Same bench. She was reading a paperback with a cracked spine and underlined passages. I said nothing. She looked up once and I nodded back, and that was enough. That's how it started. Not with a bang, not with butterflies, but with a rhythm. Every Sunday, she'd be there. We didn't exchange numbers or names, we just sat. Sometimes she'd read. Sometimes I'd bring coffee, one extra. Sometimes we'd sit so close our coats would touch. I think I started living only between those Sundays. The days in between felt like filler scenes in a film. Unimportant, colorless. She never asked what I did. I never asked where she went. It was as if we agreed not to ask questions, as though naming things might ruin them. I began to crave those silences, those shared still moments with her. There was something sacred about them. We didn't have to pretend to be more than we were. There were no expectations, no pretenses, just two people orbiting the same quiet loneliness and pretending not to notice how perfectly we fit. Eventually, words did come. Carefully, at first, like wild animals you don't want to startle. She told me her name was Lena. I told her mine was Ivan. She laughed and said she knew. Apparently, I mumbled it once in my sleep, on a Sunday afternoon when I had dozed off beside her and she didn't move until I woke up. She told me she worked in a bookstore but didn't like to read anymore. I told her I worked in an office and didn't know what my job really meant. We started to share little pieces of ourselves, like breadcrumbs dropped in a forest. Clues in case we ever got lost in each other. She said her father used to fix clocks, but couldn't keep time with anyone. I told her my mother made perfect lasagna, but didn't know how to stay married. We never talked about love. We never called what we were doing dating. But it grew, slow and stubborn, like weeds through concrete. She started showing up earlier. I started bringing her pastries. We started holding hands without noticing when it began. I remember one Sunday when it rained so hard we had to take shelter in the station's tiny, rusted waiting room. She pulled her knees to her chest, shivering slightly, and I wrapped my coat around her. I remember thinking that if the world ended right then, I wouldn't complain. I wouldn't ask for more. I would have died knowing I once felt the warmth of another human being and didn't flinch. That Sunday, she kissed me. Not a passionate, movie-worthy kiss, but something softer, like a secret passed between lips. It tasted like rain and regret, She pulled away first and whispered, "Don't fall for me." But by then, it was too late. I had already started. After that, things changed in the most delicate ways. She started texting, short things, a photo of a dog on a train, a blurry sunset, a song lyric. I never knew where she went during the week, and she never offered to explain. I assumed she had a life somewhere, a small apartment, maybe a cat. I didn't pry. I was too afraid I'd find something that would make me stop loving her. Or worse, make her disappear. There's something frightening about happiness when you're not used to it. You start checking your pockets, waiting for the loss. She once told me that she had this habit of disappearing when things got too real. "It's not you," she said. "It's gravity. I just don't know how to land." I smiled and told her I'd be the ground. She looked at me like I'd said something terribly kind and terribly foolish all at once. I should have known she was warning me. Then came the Sunday she didn't show up. I waited 5 hours. I watched 3 trains pass. I walked the length of the platform 27 times. I counted. I went home and checked my phone every 5 minutes. Nothing. That night I told myself maybe she was sick. Maybe her train got canceled. Maybe her phone died. But the next Sunday came, and the bench remained empty. The Sunday after that too. And the one after. I stopped going after the 6th, not because I gave up, but because I couldn't bear to watch the place we made sacred turn into a grave. I sent one last message. "I'll wait as long as it takes." She never replied. I told myself stories to keep from unraveling. Maybe she moved. Maybe she met someone. Maybe she was never real. But I knew she was. My life had split into 2 timelines, before Lena and after. And nothing about the after felt right. I deleted her number once, then restored it 5 minutes later. I still check that bench when I pass by, even now. Just in case. Because hope, I've learned, is a quiet thing. It doesn't scream. It lingers. It whispers in moments you least expect. I still carry her coffee order in my memory like a prayer. Oat milk, 2 sugars, always warm. And the strange part is, despite the silence, despite the vanishing act, despite the aged, I never once hated her for leaving. Some people hurt you in a way that's almost poetic. Like their absence writes something permanent in your skin. Lena was that kind of wound. Bleeding. Unforgettable. I started writing letters I never sent. I filled notebooks with all the things I wish I'd told her. That I would have waited a year. That I would have loved her even if she never loved me back. That she didn't have to be whole for me to stay. That some people are worth breaking for. But I also wrote about healing. About learning how to live on Mondays again. About breathing through the age. About slowly stitching yourself back together even when the thread cuts your fingers. I didn't date for a while. I couldn't. Every woman I met felt like reading in a language I didn't understand. I smiled. I listened. I left early. Until Clara. But that's not her story. Not yet. This story is about Lena and Sundays. And the space between what we want and what we're given. The distance between a kiss and goodbye. Between showing up and vanishing. Between remembering and letting go. And maybe, just maybe, it's also about finding someone again. Even if it's only in the pages of a story you didn't know you were still writing. I didn't see her again. Not for months. And yet she didn't really leave. That's the thing no one tells you. When someone you love disappears, they don't take their presence with them. They leave it behind like smoke in the curtains, like music lingering in the air after the speakers go silent. Lena haunted the edges of everything. I'd walk through the bookstore near my office just to breathe in the smell of old pages and wonder if she'd been there. I started noticing cracked spines on strangers' paperbacks. Searching for her underlines, I'd hear a song on the radio and suddenly remember how she used to hum out of tune, barely audible, when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I'd pass that bench, our bench, and feel my legs twitch with the instinct to sit. But I didn't. I was trying to let go, trying to pretend that whatever we had wasn't unfinished, just ended, that it didn't matter she never said goodbye. That maybe some stories don't need closure, that maybe she was never meant to stay. But grief doesn't respect logic. It loops, it replays, it rewinds to the good parts and pauses on the hurt. And you? Well, you just sit there, watching, rewatching, wishing the ending would change. I threw myself into work. I started taking longer shifts, answering emails I used to ignore, drinking coffee until my hands trembled just to feel like I was accomplishing something. My friends noticed. They asked. I shrugged. They said things like, "You'll meet someone better." And I smiled the way people do when they're tired of pretending words help. I started dating again, not because I was ready, but because I thought maybe pretending to be would speed up the process. That's when I met Clara. Clara was nothing like Lena. That was the point, I think. She was bright where Lena was shadow, open where Lena was closed, predictable in the way that comfort sometimes is. We met at a coworker's birthday party, both awkward, both hiding near the snacks. She laughed easily, talked in paragraphs, touched my arm when she laughed like we'd known each other longer than a night. I asked her to dinner a week later. She said yes with a smile that didn't try to hide anything. Our first date was smooth, almost rehearsed. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't sweat through my shirt or forget my own name. And maybe that was the problem. I missed the weight of unspoken things, the tension of silence, the mystery. But I told myself this was better, healthier. Clara liked long walks, strong opinions, and checking in. She'd text me good morning. She'd call just to ask about my day. She made space for me without needing to be asked. And slowly, I found myself settling into that space, even if part of me still lived on a platform bench on Sunday afternoons. I didn't mention Lena. Not at first. And when Clara asked if I'd ever been in love, I lied in that casual, deflecting way people do when the truth feels too complicated. I said, "Sort of." She raised an eyebrow but let it go. Months passed. Seasons turned. We took weekend trips, smiled in photos, posted memories that felt almost real. And I told myself I was healing. That time had done its job. That the ghosts were fading. But memory doesn't work like that. One evening, Clara and I were walking home after dinner, laughing about something small, when we passed a woman on the sidewalk. She had her head down, coat too big, shoulders hunched against the cold. For a second, my heart stopped. I turned, breath caught halfway. It wasn't her. But it might have been. And that single maybe shattered the lie I had been building around myself. Clara noticed. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah. I just thought I recognized someone." She studied me for a beat longer than she needed to, then reached for my hand. And I felt it then. Guilt like lead in my gut. Because I was holding the wrong hand. The weeks after that felt like borrowed time. Clara started asking more questions. About where I went when I was quiet. About why I looked at my phone like I expected bad news. About why I sometimes said, "well," and then corrected myself. I told her the truth one night after too much wine and too many silences. About Lena, about the Sundays, about the goodbye that never came. Clara didn't cry. She just sat there, eyes shining, voice steady. "Do you still love her?" I didn't answer, and that was answer enough. She left the next morning, no drama, no slammed doors. Just a folded note on the kitchen counter that said, "I hope you find her or forget her." But I can't be the space in between. And I couldn't blame her. I let things fall apart after that. Let the dishes pile up. Let calls go unanswered. Let myself feel it again. The I'd tried to bury under routine and comfort. I revisited old journals, old texts, old photos. I let the pain come back not as an enemy, but as proof. Proof that what I felt was real. That Lena wasn't a dream I had while lonely. And then, almost out of nowhere, it happened. I got a letter, a real one. Not a text. Not an email. A letter, folded into thirds, sent with no return address, just my name scribbled in small, uneven handwriting. Inside a single page. No greeting, no sign off. Just this. "You once said you'd be the ground. But I couldn't let you catch me when I didn't know how to fall without breaking us both. I'm sorry. I've thought of you every Sunday. L." I read it so many times the paper started to wear thin at the creases. I didn't know where she was. I didn't know what she wanted from me, if anything. But I knew she was out there, alive, thinking of me. And just like that, everything changed. My grief shifted. It became a map again, not a grave. I started retracing memories, trying to decode clues I hadn't noticed before. I went back to the bench, sat there every Sunday for a month. Nothing. Until one Sunday, someone sat beside me. A woman. Not her. An older woman with kind eyes and a bag of breadcrumbs for the birds. She glanced at me, smiled, and said, "Someone used to sit here every Sunday," said she was waiting for someone who never showed up. My heart froze. "Did she ever say her name?" I asked. The woman shook her head. "No, just always had a book with her." Same one. Kept flipping through it like she was trying to find something she lost in the pages. My voice caught. "What book?" She smiled. "Some novel. I don't remember the title. But I remember she underlined everything. Even the spaces between words. That night I tore apart my apartment looking for the copy Lena had once loaned me. I found it in a box under old scarves and forgotten receipts. I flipped through the pages, running my fingers over the inked lines, the bent corners. Then I saw it. A small note scribbled in the margin beside a line I'd always loved. It read, "Find me where the sea ends and the sky begins." I didn't sleep that night. I knew what it meant. She once told me about a town by the sea where her grandparents used to live. A quiet, coastal place no one visited anymore. She said it felt like the end of the world and the beginning of something softer. I bought a train ticket the next morning. No guarantee she'd be there. No idea what I'd say if she was. But I had to try. I had to know. I arrived just before dusk. The sky was smeared in lavender and orange, and the air smelled like salt and forgotten summers. I wandered the shore, heart-pounding, eyes scanning every silhouette. Then I saw her, or maybe I imagined her at first. Standing by the rocks, coat still too big, hair pulled back in that same messy way, staring out at the water like she was waiting for the sky to answer a question. I didn't call her name. I just walked, slow and certain, until I was beside her. She turned, and in her eyes I saw everything I'd missed. Everything I hadn't been ready to understand the first time. She didn't speak. Neither did I. We just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the horizon blur. Sometimes silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's everything. And in that moment, I realized something. Love doesn't always follow the rules. It doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it leaves, changes, breaks, and finds its way back. Sometimes the space between Sundays is where you learn how to hold someone without needing to keep them. And sometimes, the most beautiful part of the story isn't the beginning or the end, but the return you never saw coming. The sky that evening was the color of bruised lilacs, and the sea whispered like it knew too much. Standing next to Lena again after so long felt surreal, like flipping to a chapter you thought the author had torn out. She didn't reach for my hand, and I didn't try to speak. We just stood there, side by side, watching the water lap against the rocks like time hadn't passed between us. The silence between us wasn't tense. It was heavy, like a shared weight, a mutual recognition of everything that had been said in absence. After a while, she turned to walk, and I followed. Neither of us asked where we were going. The path was narrow and covered with salt-stained boards, winding through weather-beaten cottages and abandoned lifeguard towers. It led to a small inn overlooking the sea. She had a room on the second floor, nothing fancy. Just a bed, a window, and a suitcase half unpacked. I stood in the doorway, waiting for permission I didn't know how to ask for. She nodded slightly and stepped aside. I walked in. It smelled like lavender and wet cotton, and I saw that same book on the nightstand, the one she used to underline. I picked it up without asking and opened to the middle. More markings. More notes. Some I remembered. Some were nude. A fresh one caught my eye, scrawled next to a line about disappearing. It read, "We are not only what we lose. We are what we return to." I looked up. She was sitting on the bed, legs crossed beneath her, eyes not meeting mine. The room buzzed with the static of things unsaid. I wanted to ask where she'd been, why she left, if she ever meant to come back. But all I said was, "I got your letter." She nodded slowly. "I didn't expect you to come." "I didn't expect to get a reason," I replied. That made her smile, a little sad, a little tired. She looked older, not in years, but in the way someone looks after too many long nights and too many unfinished thoughts. She finally met my eyes and said, "I left because I was scared. I stayed away because I wasn't ready to not be." There was no apology in her voice, just honesty. And maybe that was better. We didn't talk much that night. She made tea, and we drank it in silence, knees nearly touching on the edge of the bed. She told me she'd been staying in that town for a few months, working odd jobs, helping at the inn, painting windows for the bakery down the street. She said it felt like a place that didn't ask questions, a place that let her breathe. I asked if she ever thought about me. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The entire room was filled with memories I hadn't realized we'd shared. That night, I slept on the floor, wrapped in an old quilt. Not because I had to, not because we were strangers, but because some reunions deserve space. In the dark, I heard her shift, heard her breath hitch like she was crying, but I didn't move. I just lay there, wide awake, listening to the sound of someone returning from a place I'd never been invited to follow. The next morning, we had coffee on the balcony. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, sunlight cutting across its surface like golden thread. She pointed out the lighthouse in the distance, said she'd been going there every Sunday. "It's quiet," she said. "No one expects you to be anything." I asked if she wanted to go today. She nodded. The walk there was long and steep, but we didn't rush. The cliffs overlooked the sea, and the wind whipped at our hair like it wanted to scatter us. When we arrived, she unlocked a small gate and led me up a spiral staircase inside the lighthouse. At the top, the view took my breath. The sky and sea blended into one endless blue, and the town below looked like something from a forgotten postcard. She leaned against the railing, her eyes searching the horizon. "This was the only place I didn't feel like I was disappearing," she said. "Because here, everything disappears eventually. The tide, the ships, even the light." I stepped closer. "But you're here now?" She nodded. "Only because I stopped running." "And me?" I asked. "What are we now?" She hesitated, then whispered. Still a question. I didn't press. I knew better. Lena wasn't someone you demanded answers from. She was someone you waited out storms with. That day, we sat inside the lighthouse for hours, sketching nonsense in her notebook, watching the sky turn from blue to orange to deep purple. It felt like a life condensed into a single afternoon. When we finally walked back, neither of us mentioned what came next. We just shared dinner at a seaside shack, drank cheap wine, and laughed at how awful it tasted. She told me stories from the town, about a fisherman who only spoke in riddles, a child who swore the gulls were spies, an old woman who claimed she was once a mermaid. None of it mattered, and all of it did. I watched her come alive again, like she was slowly stitching herself back into the world. I stayed 3 days. Each morning, we had coffee on the balcony. Each afternoon, we visited some new forgotten corner of the town. Each night, I slept on the floor, a quiet boundary neither of us named. On the third night, it rained. Hard. The kind of rain that shakes windows and drowns out thoughts. She stood by the window, hair damp, arms crossed. "You have to go back eventually," she said without turning. "I know," I replied. "But I don't want to," she sighed. "You still carry me like I'm something you're waiting to finish, Da." "You're not unfinished," I said. "You just paused." She finally turned to me. Her eyes were different, clearer, steadier. "I'm scared, Evan, that I'll leave again, that I don't know how to stay." I took a step closer. "Then let's not talk about staying. Let's just talk about tomorrow." That night, she didn't let me sleep on the floor. We didn't talk. We didn't touch. We just lay there, backs barely brushing, listening to the rain and pretending it was enough. It was. When I left, we didn't say goodbye. I boarded the train with her standing on the platform, arms tucked into her sleeves, eyes on the horizon. As the train pulled away, I looked back and saw her raise her hand slightly. Not a wave, just acknowledgement. I didn't cry. Not until I was far enough that she couldn't see. Back in the city, everything felt too loud, too bright, too full of people who didn't know what it meant to wait. I returned to my routine. Emails, meetings, lunches that tasted like nothing. But something was different now. I didn't feel lost. I felt like I'd left a bookmark in a story that wasn't finished. We didn't speak for weeks. Then one day, a postcard arrived. A photo of the lighthouse. On the back, still here, still waiting for the tide to return. Hell, after that, the postcards became frequent. Not daily, not even regular, but often enough to form a thread. One had a sketch of the town's bakery. Another was just a feather taped to the back of a receipt. One was completely blank except for a coffee stain in the corner. I sent her letters too, sometimes full of words, sometimes just a pressed leaf, sometimes nothing but a page torn from a book we both once loved. We created our own language, our own rhythm again. Sundays became sacred in a new way. I'd go to the bench, read her notes, write back. It was a long-distance relationship that didn't have a name, one that existed more in feeling than in form. One Sunday, she wrote "Come back when the lighthouse light breaks. You'll know what I mean?" I didn't. Not then, but I kept the card in my wallet waiting. Life moved forward. I met people. I worked. I smiled in photos, but always with one eye turned toward the sea. Then, nearly a year after I left, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, heart thudding. It was the innkeeper from the seaside town. She said the storm had been bad. Hurricane winds, flooding. The lighthouse had been damaged. The light was broken. My hands shook as I packed. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't need to. I arrived on a Monday. The town was bruised, beaten, but still standing. I ran through the streets, dodging debris, until I saw her. Standing by the base of the lighthouse, hair whipped wild by the wind, face streaked with rain. She saw me and didn't move. I ran to her, grabbed her hand. "You said when the light broke?" She nodded, because I knew it would take something like that for me to believe I was ready to be seen again. "And now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "we start over. Not from the beginning, from the truth." And this time, she kissed me first. The storm still raged around us, but I didn't feel a thing. I had found her again. Or maybe, finally, we had arrived at the part of the story we'd both been too scared to write. The part where no one runs. The part where the light breaks, not to blind, but to lead you home. The storm lasted 2 days. It knocked out power across half the town and closed off the coastal road with fallen trees and angry waves that crashed far beyond their usual reach. But I barely noticed. We stayed in the little room at the inn, surrounded by candles and damp air that smelled of ocean and electricity. Lena barely spoke the first night, and neither did I. We didn't need to. We were back in that strange, familiar rhythm. One where silence was just another kind of conversation. I lay on the bed with her beside me, both of us fully clothed, our bodies exhausted from the adrenaline of finding each other again. The wind screamed outside, rattling the windows, but I felt calm for the first time in months. She held my hand under the blanket, and I knew then that it wasn't the storm that brought me back. It was the breaking, the collapse, the permission to rebuild. By morning, the world outside had stilled. Streets were muddy veins through the quiet town, boats lay upside, down like beetles along the shore, and seagulls circled low with disoriented cries. But the lighthouse stood, scarred but standing. Like her, like us, we helped where we could, carrying buckets, moving branches, checking in on elderly neighbors with cracked windows and wet floors. Lena seemed lighter now, like she'd given herself permission to belong again. We laughed while pulling a soaked mattress down a staircase, nearly slipping twice. And when I caught her at the bottom, her face pressed against my chest, I heard her whisper something I almost didn't believe: "I'm not leaving this time." And I didn't ask if she meant the town, or me, or herself. I just nodded. It was enough. That week blurred into a kind of temporary reality. The town was rebuilding, and so were we. We started having breakfast in the courtyard of the inn, even in the cold. She wore mittens with a hole in one thumb and always stole my toast. I started keeping a journal again, mostly sketches of her face, her hands, her notes tucked into books. She brought out her paints one afternoon and invited me to the beach, saying she needed to capture the way the storm had changed the sea. I watched her paint until the light disappeared, adding only a single brushstroke myself, a thin line of gold through the center of a crashing wave. She didn't comment on it, just smiled, like she knew what it meant. One night, curled up on the floor of the lighthouse with a thermos of tea between us, she finally told me the full story, about the year she vanished, how she had spiraled into herself, overwhelmed by the weight of almost being loved, by the fear that she'd ruin it the way she ruined everything else. She talked about nights in rented rooms with ceilings she didn't recognize, jobs that paid in coins and apologies, towns where no one called her by name. I kept thinking, she said, eyes on the horizon, that if I didn't let you love me, you wouldn't have to hate me later. I didn't speak. There was no speech for that kind of confession. Only presence. Only the slow reaching of my fingers across the floor to touch hers. We began spending every day together, not out of obligation, but out of desire. It felt like breathing had become a shared act, like the tide that used to separate us had started moving in sync. She gave me a key to the lighthouse. I started leaving toothbrushes in her room. We didn't say, "I love you," not yet. But it was there, floating in the space between her laugh and my quiet glances. It was there when she traced my collarbone with the tip of her finger while half asleep. It was there when she asked me to teach her how to make lasagna, even though she hated cooking. We burned it, of course, but ate every bite. I told her about Clara, not in detail, just enough for her to understand the space she had left behind. She nodded, not jealous, but pained in that way people are when they realize how deeply they've been missed. Then came the letter. Not from her this time. From the city. My job had been holding my position in silence, but now they wanted an answer. Stay or go. I sat on the beach with the envelope in my lap, unopened, like it was a bomb. Lena joined me without asking questions, just sat beside me, knees brushing, eyes distant. "You could stay," she said finally. "We could make something here." I swallowed hard. "I know, but I didn't come to stay. I came for you." She tilted her head. "And now that you've found me." I looked at her. "No, I need to know if you're enough." Her face didn't fall. She didn't flinch. She just nodded because she understood. Love isn't a question of want. It's a question of fit, of timing, of whether your life can hold someone else's chaos without drowning. And the truth was, I wasn't sure. I loved her. That much was clear. But I had built a life elsewhere, one with direction, routine, a future. What we had here was beauty. But beauty doesn't always pay rent or fill time. That night we didn't sleep. We lay in silence, backs touching, breath slow. And just before dawn, she turned and whispered, "If you go, I won't ask you to come back again. Not because I don't want you to, but because I can't survive waiting anymore." My chest ached. I said, "If I stay, I need to know we're building something, not hiding in something broken." She didn't reply. But the way she kissed me that morning told me everything I needed to hear. The next day, I called my office and resigned. They were disappointed but professional. I didn't tell them the truth, that I was choosing a love that terrified me, that I was trading glass windows and elevators for seagulls and chipped paint. I started working at the inn part-time, helping with repairs, managing bookings. I taught a kid in town how to play guitar. I fixed the library's ancient computer. I made myself useful, not out of obligation, but out of a need to belong. And Lena, she bloomed. She painted murals along the sea wall, taught art to children who scribbled monsters with 6 eyes. She started saying yes to small things. Dinners with neighbors, town meetings, sunsets on rooftops. We built a life that didn't look like the ones in magazines but felt more real than anything I'd ever known. We argued sometimes. About dishes, about money, about whether or not we should adopt a dog. But the arguments were quiet and short-lived. We always came back to the same place, each other. One night, months later, we were walking home under a sky so clear it felt borrowed. She stopped suddenly, turned to me and said, "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" I smiled. "You missed the 12:45. She laughed. "And now I'm the one who doesn't miss anything." I reached for her hand. "Not even the city." She shrugged. "Sometimes. But then I remember what I used to miss most when I lived there. You." It wasn't perfect. There were days I wondered what I'd left behind. There were days she stared at the sea too long. But there was also laughter, touch, growth. I started writing again, short stories, mostly. All of them about people who leave and return and rebuild. She read everyone and circled her favorite lines in red ink. We made new Sundays. Ones filled with routines we invented from scratch. Pancakes, sketching on the porch, long walks to nowhere. The lighthouse light was never fully repaired, but we didn't need it anymore. We were our own signal. And then, 1 year to the day after the storm, she brought home a letter. It was from her mother, someone she hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. The letter was short. "I heard you're safe. I hope you're happy. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just handed me the paper and said, "I think I'm ready to go back. Just for a visit." I didn't ask if I was coming with her. I didn't need to. We were no longer the people who waited in silence. We were the people who spoke, who trusted, who walked side by side. That trip changed something in her. Not because it was easy, but because it reminded her of everything she'd outgrown. We stayed for 4 days, met her mother in a quiet park, drank lukewarm coffee, and spoke carefully around old wounds. When we left, she held my hand the whole way back. "I'm done running," she said. "Even when it's hard." Back at the coast, life settled into something richer. We hosted friends. We adopted the dog. We fixed the roof ourselves. We burned the lasagna again. But mostly we loved. Slowly, imperfectly, and without fear. Because love, real love, isn't about the beginning. Or even the return. It's about what you build after the storm, when the winds die down and you have to decide if you still want to stay. And we did. Every single Sunday, the 5th year began quietly, without ceremony or grand declarations. We didn't count anniversaries by dates anymore, but by the return of familiar things. The bloom of the wildflowers behind the lighthouse. The way the sea turned silver under spring sun. The annual town fair where Lena always won the pie eating contest despite never eating more than a few bites. Time had settled around us like dust, soft and unobtrusive, marking our lives in small moments rather than milestones. We were no longer the people who met on train station benches or the ones who left cryptic notes in books. We were two souls who had chosen to stay when staying meant vulnerability, compromise, and commitment. Lena had transformed the town in ways she never noticed. Her murals turned old, forgotten walls into explosions of color. Sea creatures entwined with stars, girls with wings instead of arms, and entire stories told in paint. Children adored her. Locals smiled wider when she passed. Even the grumpiest shopkeepers softened under her steady kindness. And I? Well, I had changed too. I no longer searched for meaning in places that didn't fit me. I no longer measured success by promotions or city views. I had found something richer, a life that made sense not on paper, but in the quiet thrum of shared mornings and whispered thoughts at dusk. But even peace holds its own kind of restlessness. It started with a letter. Another one. From a literary magazine I had submitted to years ago, long before I met Lena again. They wanted to publish one of my short stories. The first in a collection I'd long abandoned. The editor loved the tone, the rawness. He asked if I had more. And the truth was I did. I had dozens, all written in the glow of our quiet life. Most of them circled the same theme, leaving and returning, breaking and rebuilding, silence and sound. I read the email to Lena aloud while we ate dinner on the porch, a bowl of lentil soup balanced on her knees. Our dog snoring at her feet, she smiled, full and proud. "You should do it." "I want to," I said. "But it means going back to the city, to that world, the one I left. Readings, meetings, flights." She looked down at her spoon. "So go." I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. Not because she was holding back, but because she trusted me. It was a strange kind of pressure, that kind of love. The kind that doesn't beg, doesn't bind. The kind that says you are free, but please don't forget what we've built here. So I went. Not immediately, not impulsively, but over time I said yes to things I used to run from. I boarded trains and planes. I read in dim bookstores and bright universities. I spoke to rooms filled with strangers who underlined my words and called them their own. I slept in guest rooms and hotel beds. And I always returned. To her, to our porch, to the dog and the soup and the town that had forgotten how to ask questions. But distance, even short-lived, has a way of seeping into the corners of love. We started missing each other at odd angles. She would text me while I was on stage, and I would reply hours later. I would call during her mural sessions, and she'd answer with paint, stained fingers, and half her mind still lost in color. When I came home, the rhythm was different. She'd moved her studio upstairs. The dog had taken my side of the bed. Our conversations, once endless, became dotted with pauses. Not cold, not angry, just full of things we didn't know how to say. One night, lying beside her, I whispered, "Are we okay?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "We're changing." That word clung to me for weeks, not because it was wrong, but because it was true. We were evolving, but growth doesn't always mean growing together. Sometimes it means growing apart in ways you don't notice until it's already happened. I started wondering if we had built a life that couldn't stretch any further, if we were holding on to a version of ourselves that no longer existed. Then, during one of my longer trips, something happened. She didn't call, not once. No postcard, no missed messages. I returned home 2 days early, suitcase still full of unread books and souvenir pens. The house was quiet. The dog wagged his tail like nothing had changed. But she wasn't there. Her easel was gone. So was the coat she wore every time it rained. On the kitchen counter, a single envelope. My name, her handwriting. I didn't open it, not right away. I stood there for hours, just staring. I made tea. I fed the dog. I changed into clothes that didn't smell like planes. And then, finally, I sat on the floor and opened it. There were only a few lines. "I love you. I always will. But I need to know who I am when I'm not part of us. Maybe I'll find it in color. Maybe in silence. Maybe in a city that doesn't know me. I'm not disappearing this time. I'm choosing. And this isn't a goodbye. It's a pause. Like we said. Only this time, let's not leave each other behind." I read it twice. Then again. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just exhaled. She had warned me years ago that she wasn't good at staying, that she feared what her presence might cost. But this felt different. It didn't feel like fear. It felt like courage, like she had finally learned how to leave without breaking everything behind her. The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove to the lighthouse. I climbed the stairs, each one groaning under my weight like it remembered every step we'd taken together. I sat at the top and watched the horizon. I didn't wait for her. I didn't expect her to appear in the mist. I just sat and wrote a letter, then another, then a dozen more. Letters I wouldn't send, letters she might never read. But they helped. They gave shape to the H. Weeks passed. Then a month, I kept working. I stopped traveling. I turned down interviews. I told the magazine I needed time. They didn't understand, but they respected it. The town asked questions. I smiled vaguely. "She's working on something," I'd say. "She'll be back." I wasn't lying. I didn't know when, I didn't know how. But I believed she would. Because this time she hadn't run. She had written. And then, like before, a letter came, postmarked from a city I'd never heard of. Inside a photo. A mural, her style unmistakable. Two figures on a bank-to-back facing opposite skies. Between them, a single thread of gold paint connecting their hearts. On the back, her writing, "Still tethered, still here." That night, I took down the old calendar, marked a new date, not for her return, not for some imagined reunion, but for something else, a day to celebrate the fact that sometimes love means letting go and still choosing to believe. That space doesn't mean absence. That change isn't always loss. I didn't know where this was leading, but I knew we weren't finished. We were paused. Again, 3 years passed like water through cupped hands, impossible to hold, yet always present in the trace of dampness left behind. Life didn't stall when Lena left again. It bent, it shifted, it adapted, the way it always does when you don't know what's coming next but you have to keep waking up. The town stayed. The lighthouse stood. The dog aged. The porch grew more weathered, and I, somehow, stayed still and in motion at once. I wrote. That much didn't change. The story collection finally went to print. Its pages filled with fiction that wasn't fiction at all. Snapshots of benches, salt, stung air, letters that never quite reached their recipient. I gave it a title that only she would understand, Gold Line Between Ooze. It sold modestly, earned kind reviews, and got me invited back to the same rooms I used to chase before Lena. I went, sometimes. Other times I stayed. I stopped trying to reconcile both versions of myself, the city one and the sea one, and simply became both. There were offers, not just professional. Invitations to dinners, tentative gestures from people who saw something in my solitude and wanted to ease it. I declined, always gently. Not because I was holding out for her return like a stubborn romantic, but because the space she left behind wasn't empty. It was occupied by something real. A tether, a ghost, a truth. Every few months, another postcard would arrive. Some from cities I could locate, others from villages that seemed to exist outside of maps. Sometimes just a sketch of a street lamp, a slice of sidewalk, or the interior of a train car. Always with her handwriting on the back. Always signed with the same initial L. The last one came from Morocco, a watercolor doorway and the words, "Still painting, still moving, still yours." It arrived in spring. I pinned it on the corkboard above my desk, right next to the first one, the lighthouse that broke. A visual diary of a love that had survived by never staying still. Then, just when the idea of reunion had settled into something purely metaphorical, she returned. It wasn't dramatic. There was no knock in the rain, no running into each other on the shore at sunset. It was a Tuesday. Mid-July. I was carrying groceries through the town square when I saw her sitting on the edge of the fountain. Hair shorter now, dyed a deeper rust, arms tanner than I remembered, a sketch pad resting against her knees. She looked up, saw me, and smiled. Not a question, not a test, just home. I froze for less than a second. And then I walked toward her, letting the plastic bag of peaches swing against my thigh. She stood. Neither of us said a word as she stepped into my arms like she'd never left, like she'd just stepped out to buy coffee and returned years later with sun in her hair. Her fingers curled into my shirt. Her body trembled for the briefest moment. And I whispered, "You came back." "I promised I would," she murmured. And just like that, the years collapsed between us. Back at the house, nothing had changed, but everything had. She noticed the new lamp, the rearranged shelves, the painting I'd bought at a market, an abstract storm in midnight blue and brass. She ran her hand over the dog's head, now grayer than before, and smiled when he leaned into her palm like he, too, had been waiting. That night we didn't talk much. We made dinner together. Her chopping, me stirring, music low in the background. And when we finally sat down to eat, the silence was different. Not hesitant, not heavy, just known. "Why now?" I asked, not because I doubted her, but because I wanted to understand the rhythm that had finally brought her home. She set her fork down gently. Because I stopped being afraid of standing still. I nodded. I understood. In the months that followed, we didn't fall back into old patterns. We wrote new ones. She didn't move back into the old room. Not immediately. She took the guest room, turned it into a studio, said she needed to rebuild her own corner of the world before joining mine again. I respected it. I gave her space, but not distance. We began going on walks after dinner. We took long drives to nowhere. She taught painting classes at the community center. I started a writing workshop at the library. Slowly, we reintegrated, not as broken halves trying to be whole, but as separate people choosing to build something shared. Then, one Sunday in autumn, she brought me a book. It was our book, the one she always used to underline. But this time, she'd gone through it again. New markings, fresh ink. And inside the back cover, a handwritten note. How we met between missed trains. We loved between departures, but we endured between Sundays. I'm done pausing. I'm ready for the next chapter, with all its uncertainty. If you are, too, meet me at the bench next Sunday. One more time, this time for always. I closed the book with shaking hands. That week passed in a daze. I pretended everything was normal. I went to the market. I returned calls, but my chest carried a thunder I couldn't quiet. Sunday arrived like a long-awaited letter. I walked to the station, the same one from years ago, the one where this all began. The bench was still there, a little worn, a little weathered like us. She was already sitting there. No book, no coffee, just her. Hair pulled back, wearing the same oversized coat I hadn't seen since the beginning. When she looked up, her eyes didn't ask, they told. And I sat beside her. "I'm here," I said softly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a thin gold thread tied in a loop. "The tether," she whispered, smiling. "You always wrote about it. I thought it should be real." I took it from her hand, held it between us like a fragile promise. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Neither am I." And for the first time in our long, complicated, beautiful story, that wasn't a vow or a hope. It was the truth. We got married the following spring, quietly, on the beach. No guests, no cake, just two people who had spent a lifetime finding their way back to the beginning, only to rewrite the ending together. We planted a tree near the lighthouse afterward, a small fig, unassuming. She painted its leaves gold. I tied the thread around its trunk, and every year since, on the same Sunday, we sit beneath it and read letters we write to each other throughout the year. Letters full of gratitude, doubt, laughter, truth. Some years are harder, some softer, but every year we remain, not perfect, not always easy, but present. And that, I've learned, is the rarest kind of love. In the end, the story wasn't about losing her or finding her again. It wasn't even about what we endured. It was about the space we allowed each other to grow. The bench that never moved. The Sundays that always came back around. And the golden thread that, despite everything, never broke. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.